So this week we're going to be looking at chapters 2 and 3 from the textbook. So we're talking about, like in general, colonization, conflict, and global change. So think of this time, we've talked very briefly about Native Americans. There's some sources in here that we're going to read more about that you're going to go over this, but you've read about indigenous nations in Central and South America. And we've also talked a little bit about exploration. So the big fives that I want you to remember. There were 5 different groups of people, all kind of fighting for this land called North and South America. You have the indigenous populations that were already here. So that's your first group. The second being the Spanish that came. Then we're going to have the French, the Dutch, and the English. The group that has the best relationship with the natives, it's not perfect, but at least they're not going out and trying to slaughter them all. It's going to be the French. So keep that in mind as we move along. Also, we're going to start talking about how race starts to play a huge role in how we treat people in the Americas. So the time period that we're talking about is 1580 to 1754. That's a long time period, right? But North America is going to be transformed by religious conflict, imperial rivalry, global trade, and changing labor systems. So those are the big things that we're going to talk about. So let's get into, the learning objectives for these chapters are there for you, but I want to talk about European expansion into the Americas. And it was shaped by a lot of religious and political upheavals. And so you have to remember what's happening in Europe is going to directly affect what is going to happen in the Americas, because a lot of European people are leaving the Americas because of that religious conflict that is happening. The biggest one is the Protestant Reformation. Break the word Protestant down right here. This first part of the word is protest, right? So what are we protesting? We're protesting the Catholic Church. If you don't know anything about the Protestant Revolution, I highly encourage you, Google it really quickly so you get a better understanding of what that break in the Catholic Church was and why it happened. There's a very important guy, his name is Martin Luther, and he is one of the main causes of this break from the Protestant Church. In order to kind of counteract that, you are going to have the Counter-Reformation that is brought on by the Catholic Church realizing we did kind of mess up. Maybe we should try to be better. So, but that competition, and it also depends on who is in power. Are they Catholic? Then they're going to treat other Catholics in their nation pretty well. But anyone that's Protestant is going to be persecuted, and vice versa. When the King of England becomes Protestant, he's going to treat Catholics very poorly and kind of force those Catholics out of England. And so that's why you have a lot of religious persecution and a lot of people leaving England for the Americas, seeking that refuge. Right? At the same time, we have this emerging Atlantic economy that's going to link Europe, let me see if I can get back here, Europe, Africa, and the Americas, right? So trading, and you kind of saw that picture, you saw the map, and then you also saw like that balance of trade, the mercantilism that was happening in chapter 1 lecture. But how do indigenous peoples, how do they fit into all this and the colonial conflict that is happening? So European demands for land and control are going to dramatically reshape native life or indigenous life across North America. So not only do we have like the great dying, 90% of populations getting sick and dying off just from diseases that they had never been exposed to, but you also have like just displacement of people coming in and conquering. You've got warfare. You do have slavery that's going to be inflicted upon Native Americans, but yet they also responded sometimes with adaptation, diplomacy, and then of course we do just have all-out rebellions and resistances happening. So in English colonies, expansion onto native land often led to violent conflicts, and you're going to read about some of those conflicts. King Philip's War, that was a name that they gave to one of the chieftains. His name is not King Philip. It's not Philip. That's obviously like an European name. An Americanized Christian name, if you will, that they gave to him. But read about those conflicts and how they are trying to resist that control of their area, their territory, and their peoples. And a lot of it is, first, it's just cultural misunderstandings about land and who it belongs to and who it should belong to. And then from cultural misunderstandings, it's like, well, there's got to be other riches and resources here that we're fighting for. You have these like land hunger and then unequal power dynamics that we're going to see. I'm not going to talk too much about Puritanism and the development of New England because that's like one specific religious group. Do know that that religion does play a big role in shaping the New England area. Puritan settlers sought to build like godly societies governed by strict and moral the religious principles, and we've kind of adopted those over time. In the United States, our major religion is Christianity. There's all different forms of Christianity, right? There's not just one. We don't just have like the Catholic Church. We have like the Lutheran Church, the Calvinist Church, the Catholic Church, the Church of Christ, the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church. So we have all of these different Protestant religions and Catholicism, but it is like a very Christian based. All of those are within the Christian realm. So those are going to influence our laws, our education, our community life, and then political authority. And in the colonies, you did have to belong to the church in order to be a politician. There was no separation of church and state just yet. That comes later on. So, however, Puritan ideals did not prevent violence. As settlement expanded, they are going to be violent. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be warfare. There's going to be killing. So keep that in mind. There's also civil war and the restoration of the monarchy that's happening back in England that's going to trickle over into the colonies and shape colonial governance and migration patterns as well. So you'll read more about that in the chapter. Global wars and those colonial consequences. Again, we have like those first couple of wars. Then you're going to get into like Queen Anne's War, also known as the War of Spanish Succession, King William's War, how those play out. They start in Europe and then they again trickle over into the colonies and colonists get mixed up in them. But you have like the French fighting for English territory in the colonies. You've got the English trying to like chase out the Spanish. So there's even warfare within the colonies, like the French colonies in Canada, the English colonies in what will become the United States, and then the Spanish colonies, which are in like Florida, along the Gulf, and in this region of what will be the United States. This is what I want you to look at though, because this to me is like one of the big things, and there's also a rebellion that happens during this time period that we're talking about. So these are the different types of labor. This is very simplified, broken down. Hopefully you can take this in chunks. So you have Native American slavery. These were the first like slaves that we had, right? Indigenous peoples were often slaves who had been captured by other tribes and sold to colonists, or like over time, even before the colonists got here, they were using other conquered tribes to meet their labor needs that they needed and become slaves. So then we have a group called indentured servants. This was the preferred method of servitude in the American colonies. So this was servitude. It had a time limit, about 7 to 10 years, and it could be longer than that, especially if you were female and you got pregnant, you were added on 2 years for each pregnancy. Indentured servants typically were not allowed to marry, so these pregnancies and these births were often out of wedlock because you couldn't marry until you had been set free. African slavery is going to slowly replace indentured servants. Really, it starts in the southern colonies of like the Carolinas, and that's where we're going to see it being replaced. And then, of course, we have African slavery. I want you to keep this in mind. We do not have lifelong African slavery in the colonies right from the get-go in like the 1500s. We do have we do have some Africans that were coming over as like indentured servants or as slaves, but they were eventually set free. So when we start talking about like the Americas forming and like the colonies turning into a nation, you are going to have some free blacks that own land, that own their businesses. That doesn't mean that they're seen equal, but they are freed and they are like able to kind of move in and out of places at first. Eventually, slave code laws will enforce this type of labor, and it will begin to strip away all rights of slaved and free African Americans or free blacks. So labor systems in the colonies really evolved alongside the global economic expansion. So early reliance on indentured servitude gradually is going to give way to this very racialized African slavery, especially in the southern colonies, like I said, and events like Bacon's Rebellion. Okay, so this rebellion, it actually does start over Bacon. It starts over like pigs being stolen and retaliation for murdering Native Americans. But basically on like the frontier of the colonies where there's no like, there's just, you're out there kind of in the wilderness living on your own. So, and a lot of like indentured servants, once they had served their time limit, they are given like a little bit of land, like 50 acres, or they can move to the wilderness, the frontier, they can live there, but they have to fight for that land because there's people already living there, right? The Native Americans. And a lot of times what happens along that frontier line are Native Americans come and they'll like burn fences, they'll burn barns, they'll steal livestock because like you are not allowed to be on this land. Just because the white man said that you can does not mean that the Native man said that you could live here, because this is where we hunt, where we still do our thing. So because they would not give protection along that frontier line, a lot of these poor people, not the elites, so like people like Nathaniel Bacon, who this is named after, his last name was Bacon, Nathaniel Bacon and some other indentured servants, along with free blacks who were also forced out to the frontier and were having to fend for themselves and couldn't have like the militia come and help them with this native problem. They're going to form their own militia and they're going to go out and start attacking the natives along the frontier who they assumed had attacked them first. They don't realize that they're attacking innocent Native Americans in some of these cases. They just see a person with Native American skin tone and look, and they go after that person. And that tribe is like, wait, we didn't do anything. Why are you attacking us? We're innocent. But what it does, this rebellion, it brings together whites and blacks. This is going to be the last time that whites and blacks in like during the colonial time period, this is going to be the last time that they're brought together. After Nathaniel's Bacon is finally put, Nathaniel's Bacon, well, he dies, so he does go away. But after his rebellion is put down, we are going to see laws being enforced that will separate blacks from whites. And this is where we see slavery becomes highly racialized and the color of your skin suddenly starts to matter more. And we're going to see that slavery will slowly shape all regions of colonial America, including the North. We're going to have slavery in New York and all the way up into what will become like New Hampshire, Vermont, those areas that are far north. And enslaved Africans, we're going to read later on about how they are going to resist that bondage through everyday acts of defiance and escape and organized rebellion. We'll talk about some of those rebellions, and you'll read about them in the book as we move forward in this course. So big picture, what I want you to take away. Together, these chapters show that colonial America was really developed with a dynamic global system. Religion, empire, labor, resistance, they're all deeply intertwined. Colonization created wealth and opportunity for some people while producing violence, displacement, and inequality. Even within white society, there's still a lot of inequality within that, but especially if you were black, there's going to be just an incredible inequality, and lifelong slavery is going to be instituted in the colonies pretty quickly. Around 1620, laws go into effect in the 1620s, full effect in some colonies like Virginia by 1640. So many other setting the stage for future conflict and revolution. And so we'll read more about the rebellions, the revolutions, the conflicts that we're going to see that shape how history is told in U.S. history. Make sure you pay attention because you do have chapter assignments for chapters 2 and 3 that are due. Those are available to you in Canvas, in Canvas are the links and they link out to Achieve. Make sure that you also do the lecture quiz before moving on to the Achieve assignments.